name's Dr. Valerie Wright, and I'm on the steering committee of Women's History Scotland, and we're an organisation for promoting women's history in Scotland and also sort of the history of women in Scotland, so it doesn't have to be about Scotland. And I'm on the steering committee and helped write the suffrage resource that we've got, which is entitled The Women's Suffrage Movement in Scotland 1876 to 1928. I kind of consider it to be my feminism is about equality for all, and I think the way the waves work doesn't encompass the full women's movement. So we've got the first wave feminism is considered like the the years up to suffrage from 1870 onwards to 1914, and then after 1918 it's argued that feminism becomes moribund and that the movement just disbands, and we don't get people coming together again until second wave feminism in the late 60s, early 70s, but that's not true. During the suffrage movement, it was so fragmented by class, by position. Different women's organisations had very distinct views on what suffrage would mean for women, what getting the vote would mean for women. Some it was women's organisations, it was about universal franchise for everyone. Some it was just about women. So it was far more fragmented than you would think. So then and during the interwar years after women get the vote in 1918, and it's only some women, because it's only women over 30 with property qualifications. So there is still a unified aim, to get the vote for everybody, but also all those distinctions are still there between class, again different positions on a variety of issues. It's almost like that stratification has always been there and is still there. So even when you think about second wave feminism, it was, who was that for? What women was that for? Who could engage with that? Was it sort of arguments around white feminism and middle class feminism and liberal feminism, and who was excluded? Working class feminists often found themselves putting class before gender. There's distinctions between women, within the feminist movement, and I think that's what needs to be overcome. But I think the wave sort of metaphor is unhelpful, because I think there's always been a continuity in women's activism, whether or not you call it feminism, and not all women's organisations are feminist, and disavow it. Some of them sort of disavow a feminist identity, but it's part of a broader movement. So I think it's complicated. I think definitions of feminism have to be more all-encompassing and more inclusive for everybody, especially now. The way things are within the feminist movement at the moment, where there are divisions, and which is not along class lines, of course, race, sexuality, your gender, all those sorts of issues. I think we have to be more inclusive, or we're not going to bring down the patriarchy. I think there's quite strong class distinctions there, even within the WSPU. The pankhursts were middle class, socialists. So they didn't have I would argue they didn't have it. They've got some understanding of working class women's lives, but they weren't living working class women's lives. I think that's the fair way to put it. And I think that's true even within Glasgow. There was Janie Allen, who was an ILP supporter and also in the WSPU and also in the Women's Freedom League, and she gave money to them all, and her father owned a shipping line, but he was a socialist. So it is that kind of, which is not to say that middle class people and those that own companies can't be socialists and support those goals, but there's distinctions there in experience, or disparities more adequately, more accurately. So I think there's always been that tension, I think, of do you put class before gender or gender before class, and I don't know if it's one that I myself have solved, because depending on your background, I think sometimes you're drawn to some issues more than others. So within middle class feminism, some of those issues don't always speak to me, because I think, well, what about working class women, or what about people who have less, or kind of acknowledge your privilege to an extent, I suppose. But then at the same time, you're not always going to agree with sort of men on the left about getting, support the men. And I don't think they do, this is not the case anymore, but it certainly was in interwar years where it was support the man on the platform and then they'll look after you, which wasn't the case, especially the ILP, because they didn't really support birth control or abortion reform, which was being discussed among the women, and it was very much like no. So I think it's a hard one, isn't it, to try and sort of have both parts of your identity at the same time, and think, what do you put first? I think you can be a working class feminist, but I think in the interwar years women certainly struggled, and even during second wave feminism in the 70s, women struggled because it's like, what organisation do you join? I know personally some people started off in things like they joined the Communist Party, and then they sort of drifted in towards sort of the sort of women's organisations from that background, or kind of had a foot in both camps, or other people that I know who you would say, were you involved in the feminist movement? They say no, I was about class in those days. So I thought something about individual feminism versus your organisational feminism. So it's like, I think as a historian going to look at feminism, it's easier, you find collective records, so you'll find records of women's organisations, and that's the place you go and look, and minutes and the decisions they make, and it's sort of easier to write history from those sorts of documents than it is to find working class women's voices from that period. So then you're looking at diaries or letters or sources like that just aren't really available. So it's easy, you can find the executive minute books of the Glasgow and West of Scotland Suffrage Society easier than you can memoirs of working class women in this period. So one of the very sort of rare examples we've got of working class suffrage activity, for example, is Jessie Stephen. So we know she talks about putting acid in phone boxes because she can get away with it because she was a domestic worker. But she's one of the only voices we've really got, which shows that silence around sort of working class women's lives in that period. But I think individual feminism is just as important. So the way that we live our lives as feminists and the influence we have on our children and our mothers had on us or our grandmothers, to me that's just as important, in terms of thinking about feminism. So I think women's organisations did a lot for women in Scotland in terms of providing resources and, as you say, collective space to discuss events that have importance to their life. Neighbourhood campaigns, housing activism, maternity, all sorts of issues. So as far as I know, there's only records for the Glasgow West Scotland Association for Women's Suffrage, so that's what I've looked at. So from 1918 onwards, I've never done any work on the sort of their earlier years. But they were a very, as I say, quite a conservative organisation. Very much a suffragist organisation, so it was all about constitutional methods, sending deputations, sort of using your status in society to make sure that the local council and politicians heard you. So they'd have been well-dressed ladies, all with the right addresses and the right husbands. So they would have standing in society, and they kind of go on to be involved in the Scottish Women's Hospitals during the Second World War, and Elsie Inglis and all that. So that material's there in the Mitchell Library. But I can't imagine they're much different from what they were in the interwar years. So it's all about legal equality and sort of equality feminism, so women being the same as men. Anything a man can do, well, a woman can do it as well. And that's very much their stance, which comes out of the sort of national body of which they're a part, which is the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. So there's a lot of the reading materials coming straight from London. So they're part of a much broader sort of federation of organisations. Meanwhile, as you know, the WSPU sort of break away from that in 1903, and it's a sort of militant organisation. But they don't really get violent in their militancy until sort of 1913. You know, there's hunger strikes, refusing to pay taxes, all that kind of thing, up until that point. And they sort of, the reason the Women's Freedom League is formed is because they become pretty autocratic, the Pankhursts. So a group of women sort of split off, and they're more about sort of more direct methods but not violent methods. So they're the ones that have the slogan no taxation without representation, and that idea of not holding back your taxes. Again, that tells you something about the sort of women who are members of this organisation, because they are paying taxes. I mean, a lot of working class women at that point, you know, they're not paying, you know, tax on property and pay, you know, inheritance tax. I think the Women's Freedom League certainly seems to have a lot more working class members. In WSPU we know they do, because I think it was Jessie Stephen that was in the WSPU. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done in suffrage in Scotland. I mean, I think we've just sort of skimmed the surface in our resource, because our idea is that local history groups throughout Scotland could use the resource we've produced so that we could learn more, so they could get into the archives and the local newspapers and see if they can find out more about suffrage activity in their area. I did a little bit of research for Paisley, where I'm from, and I didn't find much evidence of working class suffragette activity. The Pankhursts come to visit, the Women's Freedom League, you know, have a meeting, the WSPU have a meeting. They seem to be slightly different class of people who are there by, you can tell the way that the crowd's been addressed and the language that's been used. So the WSPU use the people quite a lot, which suggests that they've got maybe a more working class audience, whereas I think the Women's Freedom League or the Suffrage Society, they use more language like, you know, ladies. You know, it's just interesting. I mean, at that point Glasgow's a big city. There's certainly lots going on in terms of civic culture. There's already a lot of women involved in educational boards and sort of philanthropic organisations. I mean, that's something to say about the Glasgow and West of Scotland Association for Women's Suffrage. A lot of those women who sit in that committee will be sitting on other boards of hospitals, children's organisations, charitable organisations, art, you know, they'll sit because they've got the time to do it. They've got a team of domestic servants at home cleaning the house, so that, you know, they can be out doing this. And I think that's one of the big sort of contradictions within the feminist movement is, you know, after after the Second World War, towards the end of the 1920s, when women can get jobs, working class women can get jobs doing other things, you've got a whole lot of middle class feminists basically saying we can't get domestic servants so we can go to our meetings. I mean, Glasgow is a city with a really vibrant civic culture. So I mean, I think it'd be easy to get folk along to meetings, and there was meetings in St Andrews Halls for all sorts of things all of the time. But you know, what we're missing is sort of detailed evidence of who was in. Nothing survived really. Sort of cheated. So rather than look at people that I don't know, like Janie Allen and Teresa Billington Gregg and all these sorts of people, I've went for the people you've probably heard about before. So I thought about Jessie Stephen, who had a very interesting life. I mean, as people know a lot more about her than me, but you know, she started off in the Domestic Services Union. I think she moves down to London, she takes some sort of union post. But my friend Esther has found out, Esther Quinn, she was in, was it the Suffrage Museum? Or no, Working Class Library. And there was a wee thing about Jessie Stephen, and it said, you know, Bristol, founder of the Women's Liberation, one of the co-founders of the Women's Liberation movement in Bristol, you know, Jessie. And I thought, oh, so I mean, she kept her activism continued that long, that she was there for like the second wave, you know, like she was doing it the whole time. Her whole life was activism, you know, so she's a nice example of that bridge between these two waves of somebody who continued to be active all the way through, and obviously a feminist. The other person I thought of was Helen Crawford, Women's Peace Crusade, and you know, heading off to Russia and the Communist Party and all that kind of stuff. And then Agnes Dolan, So Agnes Dolan was apparently friends with Helen. Now we don't know if they're friends or if they're just colleagues, but they kind of come through the ILP together, and they realise there's nowhere for women to be talking about peace issues. So they form a branch of the sort of Women's International League for Peace, and then they find out it's very middle class. So then they form an organisation called the Women's Peace Crusade, and it has a branch in Glasgow. And the idea is to get working class women involved in this movement for peace during the First World War. But of course it's banned because we've got a war effort on, and women are meant to be munitions workers, and you're not meant to be demanding peace at a time when everybody's meant to be involved in the war effort. So they go to, there's like a sort of a council meeting in the city chambers, and they go in and fling leaflets demanding peace, and they get arrested, and it becomes quite a big thing. But I mean, Agnes, she went on to be a councillor for Springburn, and she did all sorts, and she sat in the Labour Executive Committee and all sorts of things. But her activism it's fascinating when you read about all the Red Clydesiders. So she's married to a man called Patrick Dolan, who became the Provost, and he was one of the Red Clydeside MPs. And they've always argued that she kind of took a back seat to his career, and he was the one that became Lord Provost, and he blunted her career. Now it might have been her choice, it might not have been, but I think we know very little about Agnes. I'd like to know more about her. 1928, she takes a break from her career for ill health. Then she kind of comes back later in the early days, and you think, I wonder if that's related to having kids. If it's postnatal depression or some sort of complex. It's just the euphemistic language that's used that you think, I'd love to know more. I think, the West of Scotland Suffrage Society, I mean, their demands for equality, and just trying to get women bums on seats on educational committees, trying to get women councillors, trying to give women, a sort of visibility in public life. I think that was quite important, even though it came from a place of just kind of quite a conservative feminism is still important, or the Women's Freedom League. You're thinking about issues such as maternity provision. One of Mary Barber's great things was having a family planning clinic in the Gorbals, in Govan, that idea of you could go along and get some advice on, contraception, because you didn't want to have any more kids. She demanded that all children in Glasgow should have free milk. Should all those sorts of things that are seen as very much women's sphere, as I was saying, education, health and housing, but it's really important in improving people's lives. And I think within Glasgow we celebrate the rent strikes because it was this great radical act that resulted in the Rent Restrictions Act, and it was they won, big victory. But you think things like getting kids free milk when their mums and struggling, and mums and dads are struggling to feed them, that's quite important as well. So it's all those little things that add up. The visibility of women in working class communities, of women doing things, so people like Mary Barber and Helen Crawford and all these sort of figures are celebrated as sort of bolshy Glasgow women, and there's a certain kind of femininity that's celebrated, and others that are not. So you think maybe that it was a step of just getting a sort of visibility of women in public life, that a woman will stand up and talk at a meeting and that you'll have to listen, or that and I think slightly annoys me they had to learn to speak like the men in order to be heard. But I think it's really important that they thought, right, well, we need to play the game their way to be heard. And that's what they did, so I think, it's quite transformative that these women could prove that they were just as good and their voices deserved to be heard.